I've received a letter from the honourable member for Port Adelaide proposing that a definite matter of public importance be submitted to the House for discussion, namely the government's continued failure to address the national energy crisis. I call upon all those honourable members who approve of the proposed discussion to rise in their places, and I call the member for Port Adelaide.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, for 2 years now, Labor has been warning of a looming crisis in the eastern Australian gas market and urging the government to take action. Even that far back as far as 2015, it was becoming clear to us at least that the LNG exporters that have been set up in Gladstone were using gas that was previously supplied to Australian users, Australian manufacturing companies, Australian power generators and Australian households. At our national conference in the middle of 2015, Mr Speaker, there was a full debate on this looming gas crisis about policy options that we would consider as an opposition going into the 2016 federal election to deal with this looming crisis. And as I think most people observing this debate know, we adopted at that conference and took to the federal election a national interest test for gas exploration, a form of gas reservation to ensure that enough of eastern Australia's gas was going to be available to Australian business and Australian households before starting to ship it off overseas. The response from the Prime Minister perhaps was predictable. He rubbished it. He said it was old-style leftyism. He had no other ideas, of course, because he thought and he suggested, he said and reassured the Australian people and Australian businesses that everything was fine in the eastern Australian gas market. Well, Mr Speaker, everything is not fine. We are now in a fully blown gas crisis in this country, and this government has been asleep at the wheel. Without decisive action, this crisis is going to have a devastating impact on the Australian economy and on thousands and thousands of Australian jobs. It has already become apparent in the power generation sector right through the national electricity market on the eastern seaboard. Power generation from gas-fired power over the last 12 months has fallen by more than 1/3. It is impacting reliability, as we've seen across the NEM over the course of this summer, and it is the key factor driving electricity prices up across the NEM. But it is a particularly severe crisis in manufacturing, particularly manufacturing sectors that rely on gas not just for reliable, affordable electricity, but rely on gas also as a key feedstock. These manufacturing companies have operated for decades on the basis of an historic prices of around $3 or $4 per gigajoule, which was the price that was in place when we left government in 2013. Under this government, the prices have spiked. And I hear the minister talk about parity pricing.
The Minister for the Environment
talking about parity pricing.
Please.
Well, the spot price in Sydney is about $10 a gigajoule at the moment. Last week it was $12.40 a gigajoule. The ARG Manufacturing Australia are talking about their members being quoted prices upwards of $22 a gigajoule, up from the historic price of $3 to $4. Well, the minister well knows that is not parity pricing, that is scarcity pricing, because this government has mismanaged a serious supply crisis in the gas market, such that, Mr Speaker, manufacturers operating overseas in other countries are able to purchase Australian gas at the moment at about half the price being quoted to manufacturers in Australia, an utterly outrageous outcome. Now, last week the Prime Minister finally woke up and recognised a gas crisis. He called, as is his wont, a gas summit to talk. He brought the gas companies to Sydney. Mind you, no manufacturers, no power generators, no state governments involved in this area, just the gas companies. And true to form, he talked, and he talked, and he talked. And then he wagged his finger, and then he mouse-blamed what the problem was in the gas industry. And the problem with this Prime Minister is all he could do was talk. He has this problem with the banks. He thinks if he goes to one of their birthday parties and gives them a stern talking to, that they'll change their behaviour. Well, that is not how this mob works. I go to the communique. The communique coming out of the PMO about this summit. Gas supply guarantee is the heading, and I thought, well, maybe there was something that came out of this summit. But the gas supply guarantee is just that the gas will be available to meet peak demand periods in the NEM, such as during heat waves. Absolutely nothing for manufacturing, absolutely nothing for the power generation sector for all of those other days during the year other than heat waves. Many have made the point, and did the day after, more talk is not going to work. More talk is going to do nothing to relieve this very serious crisis. We need action, but we know around this chamber, out in the community, this government's not very good at action. They're very good at talk, particularly this Prime Minister, but not very good at action in energy policy, particularly because this is a government paralysed by ideology, paralysed by their internal divisions, as well as their fondness for sitting back in the cheap seats and blaming everyone else, taking no responsibility as the nation's government. And it's not just in gas, we know, Mr Deputy Speaker. You see this approach as well in the electricity sector, where there is a supply crisis emerging here too. Now, you ask why? Well, there is a supply crisis essentially for one reason. 3/4 of our existing coal and gas-fired generators are already operating beyond their design life, and as we're seeing only next week in Hazelwood, a 50-year-old power station, they're closing. They're closing. It's 50 years old. Do you know anything about the electricity sector? The problem is, with 4,000 gigawatts closing under this government, there are no replacements because there is no policy framework. Everyone agrees what the policy framework should be. Everyone except this government. The business, I can't remember where he's from, but the member next to the minister says rubbish. Well, the Business Council of Australia, BHP, AGL, Energy Australia, the National Farmers Federation, Origin Energy, the Energy Markets Commission, CSIRO, Energy Networks Australia, the Chief Scientist, Climate Change Authority, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, Danny Price, the Prime Minister's former energy advisor, state governments, Labor and Liberal alike, we hear from the New South Wales government, and many other energy stakeholders. We look to find who's opposed to an emissions intensity scheme. We know this government is. We suspect probably One Nation is. Everyone else knows the solution to this supply crisis. It's just that this government, particularly this minister, isn't able to deliver his party room. Danny Price nailed it in December when this minister was overridden because of a revolution from Corey Bernardi. Well, that worked really well. Placating Corey worked really, really well. A bit of a revolution from the former Prime Minister, the member for Warringah, and this minister got overridden in just 36 hours. And Danny Price nailed it when he said, because of that decision, that terrible decision in December, this government, this party of government, will be the party of reduced electricity security and increased prices. That's what Danny Price said. Now, prices have already been an issue in this country for more than 10 years because of the gold plating of the networks that go back to the Howard era. Gold plating of the networks, which has seen particularly the coal-fired states of the eastern seaboard see the largest price rises, as the Australian newspaper helpfully pointed out a couple of months ago, the largest price rises in Queensland, then Victoria, then New South Wales. But now we see wholesale prices spiking under this government. They've doubled under this government. Wholesale prices have doubled under this government because of their inability to deal with the supply crisis. The NEM, over the last summer period, the NEM average wholesale price was $134 per megawatt hour. $134, more than twice the wholesale price in the 2 summers during the carbon price mechanism. Twice. In Queensland, almost triple the price during the carbon price mechanism, a wholesale price over the summer just finished of $200 per megawatt hour. Excuse me, 1/3 higher than the South Australian wholesale price over the course of this summer. Now, Dick Warburton, who chaired a review for the former Prime Minister, said there is a good way to put downward pressure on wholesale power prices: expand renewable energy. Expand renewable energy, but this government's done nothing but attack renewables, hurting prices. The ABS told us on Friday, killing 1 in 3 jobs. 1 in 3 jobs in the renewable energy industry gone under this government, while around the world 45% growth around the world in renewable energy jobs. This government has lost thousands upon thousands. Now, to be fair, this government does have one plan, or at least the Minister for Resources, Senator Canavan, has a plan: build new coal-fired power stations. And the Prime Minister announced it at the press club waited for the clamour, and there was deafening silence until one person had said they'd be willing to take the taxpayers' dime to build coal-fired power station. Clive Palmer said he'd partner with the Minister for Energy and build coal-fired power. The bloke whose last brilliant idea was to build Titanic 2. That's the great supporter of this government's energy plan. All this government can do is rest on tired ideology framed by tired old scare campaigns.
Before I call the Minister for